Hello and welcome to another Oki interview. My name is David Emmanuel Noel and today I'm joined by Anders Hagberg, flutist, saxophonist and composer. Anders, thank you for joining us. Please tell us your story and introduction into music.
Yeah, my pleasure, David, and thank you for having me at your magazine and this podcast. I've been involved in music professionally since the early 80s, you can say. I was studying jazz performance and jazz education at the university in Gothenburg, West Sweden, which was the first university in Sweden, by the way, who included rhythmic music and Afro-American music as a course that you could take, a four-year university course. So, I'm from the beginning, I'm a flute player. By coincidence, I wanted to play the drums, but it was full on the course, so I wanted to play electric guitar. But you couldn't get that teaching back then when I was a kid in the town I was living. So I made the third choice, which was the flute. And I say that as a reason for the strange way I play on the flute sometimes with beatboxing before beatboxing was invented and making distorted sounds with the voice or the wah-wah pedal when I was 14 and stuff like that.
So maybe you invented it.
I don't know. When this guy came on YouTube, I don't know if 15, 20 years ago, it was this guy who was beatboxing on the flute all over the place. I was thinking, oh man, I should have really done that thing early on.
Your major influences then in terms of your progression into the field of jazz?
There's so many influences, and I think actually I've always been improvising. My classical flute teacher, when I was a kid, he wanted me to read the music, but I couldn't do it. So I asked him to play, and then I copied him, and he thought I was reading the music. So I always picked it up by ear, and so for me it's been very natural to improvise. And when I was a teenager in the 70s, this was a very vibrant decade in music. I mean, with all the fusion scene coming up, post Bitches Brew, when Mahavishnu Orchestra, Chick Corea, Return to Forever, all these, Weather Report, of course. And also in Sweden, it was a very active venue because we also have a strong social democratic government since decades at that time, and they have a very active and progressive politics for arts. So they really supported a lot of music. So when I was in high school, there came these jazz and fusion groups playing for us in the auditorium, which was kind of amazing at that time, where you couldn't get electric guitar in the music school, but came these people. So I mean, that really made me start with this, with music, and all my influences were African American artists from, Stevie Wonder, Herbie Hancock, and Russian Roland Kirk, of course, as a major influence on this flute playing. But then the key thing for me, I was so wanted so much to start playing the saxophone, but my classical teacher said, no, you ruin your embouchure, don't do it. So I obeyed him, was a good pupil, I obeyed him. And until when I went to Finland and heard Sonny Rollins live with Al Foster on drums, and I was totally blown away. So I went straight back to Sweden and didn't tell my parents. I just went to my grandmother and said, "Hey, can I borrow some money? I want to buy a saxophone." And after that, I had a real
and the rest is history.
Well, I had a 10-year love affair with a tenor saxophone. Trying to master the tradition of jazz, going to college and having all the major icons that I tried to learn from and listening to, like Rollins, of course, Dexter Gordon, John Coltrane, naturally Wayne Shorter, all those major influences. So that was the starting point for my professional career, and I was fortunate to be drawn into the music life outside the academy when I came to Gothenburg, and I was kind of supporting myself playing with rhythm and blues band and rock bands and Latin American bands also. So it was. When I look back, I see I learned a lot from going to school, but I learned as much as playing with the guys who just learned from sitting in the basement playing, and being on the stage. So that was also an important college of the tour bus, if you say.
Good. And obviously the influences are there, but how does that collapse with your own, you could say, Scandinavian perspective? Because we are obviously talking about sort of the African American influence, the African influence, the Indian influences. So how does that marry with your own style of music, you could say?
I mean, it's both ways, you can say. In one sense, it's there naturally. I mean, the culture and the music that you were surrounded with as a child. We have a very alive folk music tradition and vocal tradition with lullabies and a singing tradition that is called. It comes from the folk music, but it's very common. And I think that kind of sense of melodic, and we have this very sad kind of sound to the modality we use in Swedish folk music. So it's there whether you like it or not. For me, it became a turning point when I was like around 30, after 10 years of intense playing and studying, and it came from the fact that I could hear a lot of these influences from the big icons of the tenor saxophone in my playing, and the journalists comment on that I sounded like this or him or her or him, and my friend said the same. So I thought, but hey, I still like to sound like myself and have my own thing, my own music. And I also start questioning whether I had the credibility to perform this music as a Swedish middle class boy, coming from an academic environment in city north of Stockholm, and all my major influences were African American artists. So that came like a crossroad where I started to think about identity a lot. And this was also the time when I started playing with Indian classical musicians. And their deep and profound connection to their musical heritage was also a lesson for me to really be aware of. I have to start digging in the environment that I have been taking for granted. So you can say that was a process in a couple of years when I became more aware of this heritage and started to work with it more consciously in my composing and in my playing.
you've just released your latest album, North. Can you tell us a little bit more about the production and process and what our listeners can expect?
Absolutely. And you can say that this album is a homecoming to the aesthetics and the connection with Nordic jazz and with you can say a Scandinavian tradition of jazz music, which goes back to the 50s, actually, where we have very prolific saxophone players, and of course the Norwegian scene coming up with Jan Garbarek and other artists. So for me, who have a strong feeling for working in the borderlands of music towards other genres, towards other cultures, collecting these guys on this album, which is one Norwegian percussion player, Helge Nordbakken, and a Finnish young piano talent, Joona Toivonen, and my close collaborator, Johannes Lundberg, who is a great double bass player and also recording producer. So it was very intuitively. We just had a brief run through because we live in different places. So we exchanged material on Dropbox, and then we met. And then, sometimes it happens. So it was first takes for 1.5 days, and then that's it. And we had the album there. So it was amazing, It's one of those things. Is it magic, or is it luck, or is it talent? I don't know. A combination, maybe. And that is, although it was, some composition were quite tricky in odd meters and textures that was not like very common, like you just play like you play a blues or a standard. It was more complicated stuff as well. But it was a perfect match. And seeing it in the perspective of the corona pandemic, and this was end of February 2020, and had we postponed the recording till end of March, it wouldn't have happened now. So it was meant to happen. Maybe you get an impression that it's only flavored by the Scandinavian music, but I would say it's more our approach to the material that we can have a common affinity with the aesthetics we play in. But my influences are very much both from Nordic music, also our indigenous people, the Sami people, which is the indigenous people of Scandinavia, which I have been working with artists from there, and I included some music and dedications, but also from my long collaborations with Indian and Middle Eastern artists. And I have a piece called Silent Ways, which include Indian tihais and odd rhythms in 11 beats. And why it's called Silent Ways is because it's a homage to Joe Zawinul, who wrote the famous piece In a Silent Way.
Okay.
So it's a little sublime homage to one of my role models. I also have pieces with very Middle Eastern influences coming from my collaboration with the Palestinian oud player and the Israeli bass player Avishai Cohen, that I was part of his recent album. So it's kind of a mosaic of influences coming together.
Right.
Melting pot. And also we had some ambient electronics that I work with. So I'm happy with the recording, and I'm so eager to present it for the audience.
You also used photography to document the album. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how that manifested?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned this because photography is a huge inspiration for me. Um, I take pictures as a hobby, and I did it when I was young, and especially street photography with the great Saul Leiter from New York, for instance. Uh,
Mm.
and when I was thinking about the title and what I wanted to express with this album, I was thinking on his pictures, and I approached the foundation, which is in New York, Soul Lighter Foundation, and it's so happened that one of the guys who was working there, he's a drummer also, and he really liked the music, so they approved for that I could use one of his fantastic photographies for the cover, which was amazing for me to get a kind of connection, and the symbol of it with a rainy, snowy, and the umbrella, it really kind of connects the Nordic winter. And in addition to that, both the drummer and the piano player are amateur photographers as well. So the liner photographer, the booklet photographer, is by the piano player.
Okay, right. Please tell us more about your role as a professor of musical performance improvisation at the University of Gothenburg.
Our institution, it's called Academy of Music and Drama, and that means that we have many musical genres like composition and sound art. We have classical music, including contemporary classical music. We have improvised music and jazz, a broad perspective of what you can call jazz. We have world music, and we have stage performing arts like contemporary performative arts. We have actors teaching, opera teaching, musical theater teaching. So being in the same building, usually when we don't have the restrictions as the latest year, I mean, there's such a beautiful synergy just meeting with someone and having coffee. And I think a lot of these things happening outside the curriculum also happens when people bounce into each other or they hear each other's performances and they make friends.
Right.
I try to encourage this a lot because our campus is in the center of the city, and just beside we have a huge art museum it's a really good art museum. It's like having international masters from all ages, and there's a concert house and there's a theater as well, very close. So in one of my courses, ensemble courses, we always end up playing a performance, site-specific performance, moving around in the art museum, and the students are supposed to interact both with the acoustics of the room, which differs from cathedral-like, the huge ceiling and stone, or more chamber music but there are paintings and sculptures curated in a way that you can have an antique sculpture beside of a sculpture from the 2010 or something like that. It's very nicely made, so you can have video art besides a Rembrandt and stuff like that. And that is a super nice collaboration with the art museum, and also to see how the student both like it and get really challenged with, they don't have a score, they don't have what chords is it, what am I supposed to do, but okay, this is it. You have to do something.
Do something. Good. Ah,
So in my teaching,
good.
I speak a lot. I think a lot about the literal meaning of the term improvisation, which comes from the Latin improvisus, which means unforeseen or unpredicted.
Mm.
So I'm of course teaching the tools of music and playing flute and saxophone and all this kind of theoretical stuff. But more important, I'm trying to encourage and make the students ready to be open to the unforeseen and the unpredictable, both in music and in life, because that is what everyone as a human
Right.
being, but also a freelance artist, you have to deal with that.
And in terms of the future, what I mean, obviously you've got the album out. What other projects will you be working on, or are you currently working on? COVID restrictions allowing.
Well, of course, it's been a big disappointment. I was supposed to make a tour with a solo performance in the US actually last August. I was invited to a big festival with the National Flute Association, and I should do things in DC and New York as well. But it was postponed till this summer, but now it's being virtual instead and made digital. So, but being employed at the university is, of course, an advantage. I've been active. I've been not suffering financially too much, and I've been trying to improvise in life also, and being creative. And I really feel that, of course, the excitement of going on the stage and meeting the audience and making music with my peers, that's the greatest thing. But the more important is also to be in the zone of creativity, and I can find that zone when recording, and also sometimes when teaching, and when working with the music and working with artists in different aspects. So that also has become more clear that there are many ways of manifesting your creativity, and that gives me the meaning of my life, to be in this zone where I can feel that I can work with music and I get ideas. So I've been doing quite a few collaborations online. I was doing a collaboration with an Iranian Kamanche player. It's an Iranian violin. He was approaching me on the internet, and he made some beautiful music. So we made songs that is going to be released. I also played with Steven Nachmanovich, the great author and violin player who wrote the important book Free Play, and we did some online sessions. And so I'm trying to manage, and I did.
It seems like you are. You're capitalizing on various levels of lockdown. Despite that, you're moving forward with fellow musicians. So that's great.
Yeah, and so it's gonna be more music released within the next couple of months, and I have also been fortunate to be engaged in site-specific performances during last summer and this summer, where we can invite the audience to come outside, and we work with dancers and sculptures in the archipelago of Western Sweden, beautiful surroundings where people are invited out in the nature, and we have music. I've been working with surround mixing of music, so you invite people coming in the nature or in the urban space, and there you have speakers all over the place. And so I'm very fond of this interdisciplinary stuff, and luckily there are organizers who also are creative and want to have the courage to try to do stuff in spite of the restrictions. So but I can mention, of course, I also wrote it to you about, I did some streaming concerts with a high professional level with 5 cameras and multi-track recording from a beautiful cathedral in my hometown. So if you like to hear the North Band on their live premiere, you can check in that Vimeo.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, we'll include it in the link.
And in addition to that, I hope that that the society is opening up slowly, and that we can start traveling and meet again. We will do a release tour for North next spring in March, and hopefully I will get a chance to do the postponed tours. I was going to the Middle East, and I was going to the US and Korea. So let's cross fingers it will be possible.
Sure. Well, we look forward to that. Anders, thank you for your time and best of luck with the new album.
Thank you, David. It was so nice speaking to you.